Hi, everyone. I know we have a interesting conversation coming up, and I'm hoping everybody can join. We are, I'm going to do a brief introduction and then hand it over to our moderator today. This is our first Bear in Mind webinar for this year, navigating multi-generational workplaces. We know that we are in a unique position with 5 generations in the workplace right now, and with different experiences, different technology exposures, different life events, and that bring different cultures that need to blend together to perform at the workplace and be an inclusive, welcoming workplace. So we'll have interesting discussions. Our moderator is, and I'll advance. I want to, first, before I get to our speakers, I want to thank our sponsors, Kennebunk Savings, Prime Buckles, and we have content sponsors, the Richards Group and Full Spectrum Wellness for this program. Today, we're hopefully joined by all our panelists. So we understand that some of our panelists are based in Maine. And with the current events, we know that some of them may be preoccupied with other events. So we send our thoughts and prayers to those who are affected. And we really don't want to impose on anyone that's not feeling able to contribute or talk at this point. So if our panelists join, we welcome that. Our moderator is Ann Richardson, owner and media director of Richardson Media Group, and is the media planning and buying and SEO agency. It's an SEO agency located in Portsmouth. She founded RMG in 2014 after several decades spent managing paid media campaigns around the Boston area, and guides her company along a values-driven path, seeking clients and creative partners who share her team's commitment to prioritizing ESG goals and using digital and traditional marketing tactics as responsibly as possible. As you might expect, some of our, or most of our panelists have extensive bios, so we will share the full bios link in the chat for your reference. We also have Brittany Angelo, impact strategist and Dirigo Collective employee. So she's a media consultant. The Dirigo Collective is a media consultancy, and she is the co-host of Responsibly Different podcast. With a background in renewables and environmental industries, she is dedicated to driving positive change for a sustainable future, firmly believes in prioritizing environmental protection in both business and personal practices, and is proud to be a part of Certified B Corp, a big B Corp community fan and advocate. Kerem Durda may be joining us, the CEO of GWI. As I mentioned, most of his working area is around Portland and Lewiston, so we will wait to see if he's able to join. Kerem is the CEO of Great Works Internet, passionate about digital inclusion, digital equity, and why that is paramount to Maine's success as we head into our future together as a state. He works in the community and uses all his 3 languages and other magical talents to advocate for immigrants in Maine. We also have Professor LaMonica. Peter LaMonica is the department chair and associate professor of the computer science department in Manchester Community College. Peter is an expert in computer forensic analysis for the USPIS. Was a pioneer in mobile device analysts. He assisted federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies with computer and mobile forensics, and was a key contact for criminal investigations for crimes against children, mail fraud, and other crimes involving computers. And finally, we have Colleen Spear, impact consultant and founder of SpearPoint Strategies. After graduating from UNH with a degree in business and sustainability, she knew she wanted to help companies improve their impact. Consulting is the way she does that. She has worked with businesses large and small, and she's worked with restaurants, clothing designers, marketing agencies, and more. And I'll hand it over to And for the discussion, Karen joined us. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks. Yes, I do think we're all here, which is great. Thanks everybody for being here. And I'm excited about this conversation. It's stuff that I think about a lot. So I'm really glad that everyone joined us today. My panelists are in some ways familiar to me. And Peter, you're the only one that we've never actually met in person before, but we share a common love of the classroom and education. So I feel like we're already kindred spirits. But Brittany, Colleen, and Karam, we've met through the B Corp community. Richardson Media Group, my company, is also a certified B Corporation. So there's just been lots of interaction on a really, I would say, exciting and growth-oriented path for my company, and just our interactions with both Dirigo and Colleen. You were my peer leader at the Bee Impact Clinic, so we go back quite a ways. So I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. The purpose of today's panel is, as you know, to talk about the workplace and all the different generational elements that are sort of uniquely characteristic of today's workplace. And what I did ahead of the webinar today was I sent out some questions to the panelists. And so I'm going to use that as the guide so we can keep the conversation moving. But I'd also really like to be able to get feedback and have questions coming in from those of you who are listening today. Because, you know, certainly we're just 5 people with our own 5 perspectives. So we'd really like to gather ideas and questions from people who are joining us today. So I thought I would start by just quickly explaining my generation first, my own personal generational identity, and then go around the group of panelists and have everybody sort of self-identify from an age and generational perspective. So I was born in December of 1964, so I am 58 years old, and that puts me into the category, I call myself a cusp boomer. So I'm just going to leave it there. And so Britt, why don't you share with us what your generational identity is?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Angelo. I am a little under the weather, so please ignore the nasally sound of my voice. I use she, her pronouns. I am 30 years old, so I believe that puts me as on the bottom side of a millennial or a Gen Y, which I didn't even know that's what millennial also was called. So learning something new every day here.
Thanks, Brittany. Colleen? Hi.
Hi all, I'm Colleen, she, her, hers. I'm 22. I was born in very late 2000, like in December. So I'm pretty firmly in Gen Z, but definitely one of the earlier Gen Z. I have cousins who are like 12 and 13. So they are more what the Gen Z that people think of. They're closer to it.
Thanks, Colleen. Peter, what age generation do you identify with?
Well, I hate to say it, but yeah, I was born in 1954. So the oldest of the group, I guess. I deal a lot with, well, my students are all much younger than I am, or most of them are. But my classrooms are full of students from all ages, from 17 right up to into their 60s. So
That's great.
I see them all.
Yeah. That's definitely something we want to touch upon, is just sort of how we're all sort of immersed in a big soup of different generations in our different workplaces, which is exciting. And Karam, what age group do you identify with?
Definitely Gen X, 1969, right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle of it. Okay, so that should give everybody listening today a little bit of the sense of the range that we have here. And let's talk a little bit about how those identities actually play out in the workplace. I think we all could agree that different generations have different stereotypes attached to them. I sometimes feel like I'm painfully aware of that, and other times I feel like it's not even an issue at all when it comes to my professional life. And I like to tell, I just was telling my team this morning, who are made up all in the 20-something age range, that I got carded the other day buying some wine, and I was pretty excited about it because it doesn't happen so much anymore. But that aside, I know that definitely for me in the workplace, there are certain assumptions people make about me because of my age or, what they think my age is. And I definitely wanted to ask our panel today, how has that been for you in different groups? And can you give us some examples of those experiences that you may have had? So Karem, let's just start with you on that question.
Well, it's interesting when I first got into the workforce, and the place that I ended up joyfully joining, I was the youngest. Not only was I the youngest engineer in the group, but I also ended up becoming their youngest ever boss, um, which has an interesting dynamic. Which has an interesting dynamic to it. And one of those things that sort of governs one's sort of life trajectory is how do you navigate a set of expectations that have been sort of foisted on you without necessarily your permission. It's one thing to have an internal sort of combustion engine to say, these are the expectations I've put on myself. It's another thing when it's foisted on you.
Mm.
And I think there's some cultural dimension too, because the way age and meritocracy and capability is treated is also different geographically. It's different in the Northeast Corridor than it is out west. It's different in the Midwest, which is different than the South in the United States, which is an interesting juxtaposition for me because I'm a Middle Easterner. I grew up in Pakistan of Turkish parents. And the way age is a demarcation of wisdom and capability and capacity is significantly different than it is in the United States.
That's definitely an interesting observation, and I hadn't actually considered the regional element. Your origins aside, I think most of us, the rest of us, are New England natives. I could be making a big assumption here. I know I grew up in Massachusetts and live in New Hampshire, but I think I'm going to make a wild guess that the concentration of colleges and universities and academia, which is one of the careers that people can work much longer in oftentimes, might be part of that. But I'm just guessing as to how the Northeast may be a little bit more forgiving of different generations potentially than other regions around the country.
It is perhaps a little forgiving, much more so now than I think it has been in the past, because there's a lot of dependency linkages to working with global companies. And I think we need to be understanding and sensitive to our interactions are not necessarily just with a North American marketplace of professionals, colleagues, mentors, and peers.
Right.
It's also international. And so from my experience, for example, I was one of the youngest ever CTOs of a US subsidiary of a German public company. It's very different on how they view age in Germany. And so I think it behooves us to understand and be flexible in the way we have our own cognitive biases of how we look at age in the workplace. It shifts, it morphs, it evolves. And I think it's become much more so dynamic than it has been in the past, in a good way, in a really good way.
Great. I do agree with that. I think it has become, I think just even having conversations like this help people to feel sort of generally more comfortable with working alongside people of different ages. Colleen, from your perspective as the most recent college graduate here, you're also starting your own company, you're trying to get launched, you're working really hard. You must be interacting with people of all kinds of different ages and identities. How has that been for you as a burgeoning entrepreneur at 22?
I mean, it's great because one of the best parts of my job is that I meet a variety of people, whether that's like at events where the goal is to meet people or just me reaching out to them on LinkedIn or through email. And so I definitely do get that range of people who are close to retirement or just now moving into management, maybe they're mid-30s and they're like, okay, now I'm going to be taking up a leadership role that previously wasn't available to them because all of the managers had yet to retire. Or they're, I talk to a lot of folks who have just graduated college or maybe are going back for their master's. So there's definitely a good range. And I do think that it's a bit strange to be in the sustainability space in particular, because it's very, I spend a lot of time talking to people who are older than me who have been working on sustainability initiatives for decades and have a lot of wisdom to share and just, you know, extensive resumes. And then I also hear this narrative of the older generation screwed it all up. And then I'm like, wait, no, I've talked to these people. Like, I can promise you, people who are older than me are doing great things. And they say, oh, it's so good that all the 22-year-olds are coming to save us. I'm like, I went to high school with these people. There's no guarantee that they're going to save you. Like, I know their shopping habits. So definitely, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of age stereotypes. I definitely run into it a lot, both I think because of their narratives around climate change and sustainability, but also just because I talk to a lot of people for my job.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. I recently got back from the 1% for the Planet Global Summit last week in New York, and the keynote speaker, I don't know if he was the keynote, but the final speaker in the over the 3-day conference was Vincent Stanley. I think most of us know who he is, and he's in his mid-80s. I think you could have heard a pin drop in the room. He capped off a fabulous conference that had lots of speakers in their 20s and 30s and 40s. There was something about listening to him at 85 or so that I think it was sobering. It was, you know, there was a gravitas to his conversation with us that I don't know anybody could have you know, imitated at all. It was amazing. And it has stayed with me. And I keep thinking to myself, one would have thought you couldn't have spoken to this group at age 85 and had anybody want to hear what you had to say, but that was absolutely not the case. It was well received, incredibly well received. And I think people were grateful to hear his wisdom. So, not to pivot over to you, Peter, after I just talked about somebody who's 85, but I do think that there's something about, you know, the wisdom that an older person can bring to a conversation that simply just doesn't exist for a person in their 20s or 30s, for example. How do you feel that happens for you in the classroom? What do you feel like that dynamic is when you're up in front of a group of students?
Well, it was interesting to hear Colleen's comment because, you know, I'm looking at it from the other side.
Yes.
Where, you know, I see the younger generation coming up and making the same mistakes that my generation made. And I'm telling people in my generation, don't worry about it, they'll catch it, and they'll figure it out as they go along. So it's interesting, but, you know, from my students' point of view, teaching in the classroom, I noticed there isn't the same background. There isn't the same knowledge base back there. So I'll make a reference to something, and my students really have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. So there's a lot of knowledge that they don't have that I do have, and that's something that I need to move into their heads, some of them, so that they can make decisions based on the knowledge that the older generation had, and move forward from there, so that they're not making the same mistake that we made over and over again.
Right. I call that cultural context. And I do think about that a lot. I think in any kind of, even a business setting, which I think can be very educational too, and academics and other arenas, we're all sharing knowledge. Most of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis is sharing knowledge. And one of the most important things is figuring out what's the contextual understanding of your audience, whoever it is. So I think that's an interesting point. And I've experienced that too. I might bring up a movie or maybe even just a pop culture reference. And, you know, one of my team members in their 20s just sort of looks at me blankly for a minute. And that happens. That's okay too. But
a few years ago, I was at a conference here in Manchester, New Hampshire, and it was about technology, and the sky was falling. But it was being led by people in their mid-20s. And after the meeting was over, I went up to them and I said, you know, I've been in the computer science area now for many years, and the problems that you're talking about right now are the same problems we were talking about 20 and 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's the technology has changed. We solved the problem, then we created new ones, and now you have to solve those same problems all over again.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. I think there is a cyclical nature to all of this. Brittany, I was actually going to bring you in to see where you felt technology actually fits into this. I know, obviously, as a younger person, you're probably what you'd consider a digital native, but working inside of an agency with different people, there's going to be lots of people coming in from different perspectives around technology. Even just the concept of the Zoom call, which we were all forced into right at the beginning of the pandemic, was harder for some people. Honestly, it was easy for some to just jump right into virtual, and that was what they were most comfortable with. Others, took a little more time and maybe still don't love it. So where do you feel technology plays a role as far as sort of connecting different generations in the workplace?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a stereotype that millennials kind of have this over reliance on technology. Although I might say that it's not, I don't believe it to be entirely a stereotype, because I think it maybe is a little true. But I guess the one thing that I will say is maybe the stereotype with the over reliance on technology for millennials is that people think that because we understand technology and we rely on Zoom calls and we are easily able to pivot to Zoom in the workplace, that we don't need human interaction. And I would say that that's maybe where the stereotype lies for the millennials, is that although I'm only one millennial and of a world full of millennials, and I would say that technology just can't replace that human interaction that we all still need. And this hasn't come up yet, so I might just bring it up, though. Some other stereotypes that I do believe to be pretty true for millennials, that I also think really makes sense for millennials, is people often think of millennials as having this short attention span, and that when millennials multitask, they're not paying attention. And I think that this assumption that millennials don't know how to multitask kind of needs to go away, because I think while, yes, we do have this short attention span where we move from one topic to the next pretty quickly, I think that actually is what makes millennials extremely valuable in the workplace, is that we can multitask and we can merge this idea of various opportunities and projects into one workday. And we don't need a ton of time to get into a task, and we don't need a ton of time to get out of a task. We can jump from tasks pretty quickly. And I think that multitasking does make us pretty effective in the workplace.
That's great. I do agree that has been something I've heard before, but I do think it also varies by the individual, of course. But thanks for bringing that up. I think that's really important. So efficiency, effectiveness, productivity in the workplace is stereotyped by Generation 2, I think. Karam, in your field, do you feel like there's any particular areas of your workplace where, age really plays more of a role? Or do you feel like in your particular workplace that it's pretty much age agnostic? How would you answer that question?
I think at our workplace, I think it's age agnostic, but we are in very much, I would say, up to our eyeballs with society trying to understand how do you make technology accessible to all stratifications of age.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, there's 330 million of us. About 150 million of us do not have access to the internet in any sizable, reliable, robust fashion. Of that 150 million, a significant majority is above the age of 55. A significant majority of ages are from to 65 in multi-households and other family members. We sometimes get and forget how important it is for us to reach out to make sure that the elderly or those who do not live and die on our smartphones or computers have a problem accessing technology. they have a problem accessing tools. They have a problem accessing various components of what is the underpinning of civilization. And it's not for the lack of intent, it's for the lack of training, it's for the lack of accessibility.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that there's a growing realization of that, notwithstanding a huge amount of funds that are coming in from the feds into the states to be able to create infrastructures that are equitable across the vertical of age. But I do think that as a society, we find ourselves struggling with that. And the reason why we're struggling with that is because it's a very large question to say, how do we make things affordable? How do we make them accessible? How do we make a web page that's easy to understand? How do we make pages and pages of text easy to not just understand, but if there's some user agreement on it, make it understandable? How do we make sure that if somebody is going on a government website or a private, company website, that the content over there is safe and secure, and so that they do not become victims of phishing and stuff like that? That's a very large societal question that we haven't answered yet, because it requires intentionality and, frankly, funding and infrastructures to handle that kind of training, and call it digital awareness. It's a very, very large question. And especially in the states of northern New England, where the majority of the population is and will be above the age of 65 in the next 20 to 30 years. Those are some really big questions. And one can look at Japan as an example of what happens if you don't do it right.
Yep. I do appreciate this global perspective, Karem. I think it is important to think outside of our particular purview, our box. And I want to make sure we are thinking about people who are in the workplace, meaning they're still employed. I think there's a whole nother conversation we could have about retirees and people who are no longer actively in the workforce and having, economic issues. Even people in the workforce obviously have economic issues, but the idea being that someone who could be on more of a fixed income or receiving government benefits is going to potentially not be able to afford a Comcast subscription or something like that, or even just not have availability of access to that because of living in a very rural area. I do agree. We need to remember that not everybody has the same ability to just jump online and go buy something, which I think many of us take for granted. So I do appreciate that. Inside the workplace, so assuming the people that we're talking about today are still actively employed and at different varying stages of their career, I do think that communication channels are key, and reminding ourselves potentially what we were just saying with Peter earlier about, understanding their contextual knowledge of a certain issue is an important factor as we are trying to communicate better. So I think those are important things to consider that may be age related potentially. Have any of you had an experience in the workplace where you felt your age was front and center in a particular situation that somehow made it go one way or the other that you might not have expected? Has that ever happened to one of you on the panel? Britt, has that happened to you before?
If I guess in relationship to communication, yes, I have this older colleague, although I'm not sure if age is exactly why he loves to communicate on the phone. I think it's more of a personality thing, but it does not matter how many times I tell him I need him to tell me he's calling before he calls. He just calls. And I tell him that I need things in writing. I need an email follow-up afterwards. Like whatever we talk about on the phone, I need notes. I need it written down. And the phone call actually really doesn't work for me. But again, I'm going to say that I think that has so much more to do with my personality and his personality, and not so much our ages, because I don't know for a fact his age. I would say we are both millennials. We're just on completely different spectrums of the millennial age bracket.
Yep.
But yeah, I would say it's just communicating time and time again until hopefully he hears me someday. Do not call me, please email me, or please write to me, because I need it in writing. So that would be my experience.
Oh, that's so interesting. I actually heard where I was reading, some entrepreneurship article the other day, and I think collectively we're all a little bit frustrated with emails and how many emails we have in our inbox, and having important messages get buried, and certainly any kind of new business communication is harder to bubble up to the top of someone's inbox these days than ever before. So I was reading an article, and it was actually encouraging people to just pick up the phone more often. And I thought, I'm not really sure that's going to go over with everybody, but clearly I won't be doing that with you. So I will make sure I text you first before I dial you up.
Well, I guess maybe one could also maybe bring in like the era. I personally was never on AOL, but I do believe my generation was brought up on AOL, and that instant message back and forth, where now we have Slack, we have text messages, and whatever other platform where you could instantly talk with somebody. And I would say that my colleagues that are all younger millennials love that very quick Slack message back and forth, where
Yep.
we can get answers extremely quickly from each other. And we actually, in anticipation of this call yesterday, my marketing agency of 8 people, we had a lunch conversation, and we were all like, we are all millennials, which is also fascinating to learn.
Yes.
That I'm at an agency of all millennials. But for the most part, all of us enjoy that very quick Slack message back and forth. And it does make me kind of wonder, like, is that a millennial thing? Or yeah, I guess, like, Colleen, you're maybe shaking your head. I feel like I'm not that much older than you, but like,
No, you're not.
were you ever on AOL? Like, are you also in love with that instant message?
It's funny. One of the things that if I have a prospective client and they're like, okay, we're ready to sign, both because I don't know their company culture, but also because I do have that like range of people that I'm talking to, I have like this communication form. I'm like, rank, email, phone, text, video calls, if you have Slack or Basecamp or whatever, rank them and let me know ahead of time which one is going to get a response. And what do you never want me to do? Do you not want me to reach out after 5 p.m.? Are you okay with me sending a GIF over a text message? Well, you know what that is communicating. If I use emojis, are we going to be on the same page? And because I just find that I notice the way that I speak and the assumptions that I make about people. If I'm on a Zoom call and I know the person I'm speaking to is 25, I'll be like, oh yeah, I'm totally that sustainability girly. I would never say that on a Zoom call with someone who's 45, because it's just not I find that when I'm speaking to older people, I'm often trying to account for my age. I feel more aware of it. And so it's like, okay, let me tone it down. Let me try and be more professional, meet them at their level. But I definitely feel with people who are younger, the assumption is often that it's going to be more casual. And so just that super quick message, we don't need a paragraph of intro, we don't need to do a formal phone call, just I'm checking in, yes or no, and then we can move on. But I definitely find that having that communication form for me is helpful, because then it's just like I don't have to be scared that I'm going to upset them by calling them. Like, it's just very clear, they've thought it through, they can tell me.
Colleen, ever since I met you the first time, which I think were you a junior or a senior?
I think it was a junior.
I think you were a junior at UNH.
Yeah.
I have learned from you. I have been on the receiving end of your wisdom ever since that point. And I think that's something I want to ask Peter about this, but I've always been a person who's believed that it doesn't matter the age of the person. There's always going to be, I call them nuggets of wisdom that you can pull from an experience with another person. It shouldn't really matter who they are or what their age is. And you've been one of those people for me, which has been really wonderful. Peter, in the classroom, as an instructor, as a professor, you're telling us that your students are multi-aged, but you're also even more challenged in that respect then, because then you have to practice multiple kinds of forms of communication, maybe try to meet people where they're at, which could be in very different places in their lives. You could have parents of young children, retirees, college students, you're just sort of, you're having a much more mixed experience than I know that I am here at my company. Can you explain how that works for you in the workplace and how you feel your communication style potentially is working with your students?
Well, I think Colleen kind of hit the nail on the head but I think it goes farther than just age. Everybody's got a different, I approach different people in different ways, and they could be the same age. It all depends on the person and what they expect.
Yes.
So there's that. And my students really is the same way. Pretty much all of my students want instant response. They don't want to be, filling out a form and sending it into someplace. They want the answer. They want it now. That's the way we need to deal with them. And it's interesting, you said, I have students who have I have parents who have students who are also in school. I have in my classrooms, parents and students sitting in the same classroom, which is kind of interesting.
That is.
And I'll get students who will be coming in and their parents had just taken a course, or a husband or a wife or something like that. And each one is a little bit different. Everybody's got their own personality.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I think everyone is really looking for that instant response. There's none of this, I'll fill out the form, I'll write it to you, I'll send you an email, you get back to me in a couple of days. That's not really how it happens. Just before we started here, I had a line out the door of students who needed to register for classes. And they were looking for assistance and some kind of guidance, but they wanted it now.
Yeah.
They're not going to send me an email and say, hey, can you work this out for me? That's just not the way it works.
Yeah. Karem, as a manager of people, do you feel like there is a response time expectation in your current position? Do you feel like there's that sort of urgency of response time expectation for you?
There is, and I think it separates itself out in various departments, but as a business, we are 24/7, 365, always on call to our customers and our partners, especially our customers. So there is an expectation of an immediacy of a response. Some of those, believe it or not, are contractually obligated. So
Right.
so you have to be ready to do that. And certainly things happen where no matter how much you plan and do risk scenario analysis, you have to immediately go into some sort of recovery mode or something. I mean, this morning is a good example, extremely good example. Not in a zillion years would have I thought that I had to get my senior staff together at 7 o'clock in the morning to talk about things of how we respond to the tragedy from last night.
Yes.
Simply because Lewis and Auburn went into a lockdown. We have crews out there, we have customers out there. What do we do? How do we do? When do we do? And now.
Yeah.
Right. So there are certain things that become muscle memory in terms of quick response that hold you instead. And there's some things where you just have to sort of say, I need 30 seconds to figure this thing out. And I think in those situations, having a variety of representations of age actually helps, because it smooths out the distribution function of our cognitive biases, right? So some of us may want to say, let's go do this now. Some of us saying, well, let's chill. Like we use the word chill, like let's chill for 30 seconds, calibrate, and now we can do, right? So I think at least my job, and together with my senior staff and leadership team, is just to make sure that everybody is heard, listened, appreciated, acknowledged, and then say, okay, now this makes sense. Now let's go forward. So
Yeah.
I think it's very dependent. Those communication channels are very dependent on the culture that is set up within that company. I do believe, to my core, B Corps tend to have a certain DNA that allows them to facilitate that perhaps a little bit more quickly, a little bit more efficiently, a little bit more acknowledgement and intentionality. That's my belief,
Okay.
having worked on a bunch of other public companies. But yeah.
Well, I mean, an urgent emergency tragedy situation is going to put people under pressure that they might and hopefully wouldn't be under on a day-to-day basis typically, but it does test, doesn't it test the response, channels that you have built and the reaction times that you may expect from each other, and even just the emotional sort of needs that people are going to bring to a situation that might cloud or potentially get in the way of a response that needs to happen quickly. So that in itself is a great example. We're so sorry that this is happening. I think it's definitely a difficult day on so many levels for a lot of people. But I think that is a good example of what we're talking about, though. You just never know what's going to happen day to day, and having different age groups with different ways of reacting is also a good balancing. I know that I have to sometimes stop myself from responding too quickly because I tend to be a little bit more impulsive, and that's my personality. That has nothing to do with my age. It's just how I've reacted to things my whole life.
And can I jump in for a second?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, this is really, I think this is a very good example of what we're talking about. When you get a room full of multi-generational people, you have the older people who have a different frame of reference that they can draw from, yet you have the younger people in the room who maybe have embraced the technology a little more, and the merging of those two things together really is what makes this happen and happen well. When you get a multi-generational group like in a room together, you have the experience. Some of these people have been through things similar to this in the past and can draw from that experience. Yet the folks that are younger and have the new technology at the palm of their hands and are really familiar with that, they can merge those things together and make it happen much faster.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Peter. Thank you for that.
And can I just add something?
Absolutely, yes.
One of the questions that you had sent out to prepare for the panel was, are there any benefits to having a multi-generational workplace? And one of the things that I'm very lucky in that all of my grandparents are still alive. I have a lot of elderly relatives who are still alive, great aunts and uncles and everyone. And I also am in different communities, I'm active in theater, and just my neighborhood tends to be multi-generational. But for a lot of people, the workplace is a central opportunity for them to be regularly engaging with people outside of their generation, and to be meeting individuals past those assumptions. Because, when you're in school and you're in college, you're almost like socially, it's very exclusive towards your age cohort. And then often when you have kids in school, then you're going to be often hanging out with their parents. So you're usually still in that age cohort. And just sort of what you're drawn to socially, what kinds of events, if you're going to the senior center on a regular basis that is built to be for a specific age. And so I think that the workplace, there are, of course, company and organizational benefits, but on an individual level, being able to regularly interact with people who aren't from your generation, it can be exciting, and it can provide different, learning experiences, and just the ability to get past whatever narrative you have about other age groups.
Absolutely, for sure. It's a microcosm of community, right? In the workplace, in many cases. And I think that's really important to think about too. As you're saying, I think we're talking about this as a benefit, that being in multi-generational settings gives all of us perspectives to consider and things to learn. And maybe we can watch people who've been through things before that we haven't and learn from them. And then in other cases, we're the ones who are leading, which is a good place to be too. I wanted to possibly move into one other area that we haven't explored. I think we've talked a lot about building trust. We've talked about communication. We've talked about access and comfort with technology. But I think we've all had experiences in the workplace as employees, and we've all had experiences in more managerial positions, potentially. I'll just make a general statement. Do you think that there's a generational difference in expectations for the workplace today? I'm thinking a lot from my standpoint of, as a company owner, my benefit package, health insurance, 401k, unlimited time off, those kinds of things are expectations in today's workplace that didn't exist for me when I was in my 20s or 30s. They just simply didn't exist. Paid family leave. I was on a call just earlier this morning with another owner, and we were talking about state by state paid family leave policies and how different it is by state. So just thinking about some of that and the expectations that employees bring into the workplace, do you think that there are more challenges because of a multi-generational workplace to make sure people are getting what they need from the benefits that we're giving in the workplace? Or do you think that it really is, it doesn't necessarily matter as much about age, it's really just about giving everybody the same thing and making sure everyone has fair treatment that way? Karem, do you have a perspective on this?
No, I do. I think the key is to provide everything to everybody, but the way different generations absorb and synthesize and prioritize is different. So, I mean, I completely agree on the benefit side. For us, for example, for our employees that are on the millennial side, we have to convince them that they should maximize healthcare coverage. Use it. Or if there are classes or seminars being set up for the advantages of setting up 401k and thinking about retirement, do it. Right. So those things, because the amount of familiarity on their side is not as high as it is for the others. On the other hand, what was interesting to me is the calibration that Gen Xs and Gen Zs have towards what constitutes a work environment that is a balance of life, mission, making money, and being equal and having some social justice calibration is significantly different than the other groups. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I do think those are countervailing forces that, if done right, actually create a much more vibrant and sustainable workforce and a workplace. Because I do think it is important for the Gen Xs and the Gen Zs to hear words of wisdom about the trials of fire that people went through, for 20, 30 years. On the other hand, I do think it's important for the other age demographics to hear why a job should not just be a job. And I think those are very different cultural recalibrations that are going on, accelerated to warp speed because of the pandemic. And for businesses that are unable to navigate that, my contention is they will not be in business in the way they think they're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, deleteriously. I think everybody needs to figure that out.
Thumbs up to that. I definitely agree. I think it's on me to accommodate myself, to move myself in a direction that I might not have expected, because that's the right thing to do, versus trying to expect everyone else to fall in line behind me if I have outdated understandings of what a workplace is supposed to be about.
Right.
Brittany, you have always been a leader in every place that you've worked in. As far as the years I've known you, you've always taken a leadership role, whether you're actually managing people or not. And I think you have always been a role model in the workplace for what we're talking about, sort of the work-life balance, that overused term. But you've done so well, I think, just from the few years I've known you, just making sure to take advantage of the time, vacation policy or PTO or whatever we want to call it, that you're making sure that you have a life outside of work. And I think that's really important. You also want work to feel satisfying, and I think we all do, right? But we've had some interesting conversations around that. And I do think that it's okay to have that expectation. I think everyone can go to work and have an expectation of coming away at the end of the day feeling satisfied by what you spent time doing. At the same time, I look forward to getting out of there. I look forward to leaving, shutting the lights off and going home and having dinner with my husband or spending time with my kids or something like that. I think it's really, I've allowed myself that because of this dynamic that exists today in today's workforce that I don't even know that I felt as much when I was younger because it didn't exist and it wasn't something that was as acceptable. So, Brittany, you want to just comment on that a little bit? I kind of led you into that a bit, but.
Yeah, I would say I do hold work-life balance to be pretty important to me. I think I've been burnt out in the past one too many times to let myself really fall into that trap again. So I think that's what led me to even push even harder for this work-life balance. If I start my day early because a client's project needs early attention, then I'm ending my day early. And I hold my schedule pretty strict. I very rarely ever go over 8 hours because there's always something that can be moved to the next day. I get that urgent things come up, but for every urgent thing that comes up, there's the non-urgent thing that can fall.
Yes.
So I do hold that pretty true to my daily work habit. I would also say, again, leaning into that personality side, I'm very rigorous with my schedule and I'm very detail oriented. And some people just aren't. Some people don't have that checklist where when the next urgent thing comes, they can drop a non-priority. So I would say a little bit of my age, but also a lot of my personality to be able to have that work-life balance. I feel like, the other thing about work-life balance is like that flexibility. And I mean, I think the flexibility of like where you work, I guess I'll say. I think COVID really unlocked the ability to work from home. It looks like kind of a lot of us are working from home right now. But I would say, yes, it feels like that's a millennial thing to want to be able to work anywhere and to be able to travel and still be working and not have to use your PTO time. But I would say that's something that all of my friends kind of demand out of their jobs, especially post-COVID now. And then the last thing I'll just say is I hold it so incredibly tight to be using my volunteer paid hours.
Yes.
So with a lot of B Corps comes that ability to volunteer during the workday and to quote unquote get paid for it. And I absolutely, that to me is work-life balance. I'm getting paid to do something that I love and to support my community, and working for a B Corp definitely allows that community support in a way that I never saw before. And that keeps me again from having that burnout where I'm still giving back to my community and furthering my company's mission.
Well said. Well said. Colleen, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to, so firstly, I read a book to prepare for this webinar, and I would highly recommend it if you want to do a deep dive on every generation and their cultural shifts and technology shifts, and look at lots of graphs about it, lots of every survey that has been done since the 1940s. I would highly recommend it. I'll put the name of it in the chat.
Thank you.
One of the things that as I was reading, I was reflecting on is every cultural shift that happens means the people coming up see that as the standard. So, they don't know what came before it. You're growing up. This is the most recent cultural shift. Technology is like the easiest example of that. Like for my generation, phones are the standard. For my grandparents, that was a transition. However, with the workplace, one of the things to keep in mind is it means that the generation prior, not the generation that is now coming in with these requirements or these standards and expectations, but it was the generation prior and the generations beforehand that actually brought about that cultural shift. So most of the things that people talk about in terms of workplace trends and, all these youths coming in with what they want and these new ideas about how management should work, these are all things that had been quietly expressed, but were getting louder and louder and louder from older folks. And these are things that maybe with technology, it was easier to accomplish this particular thing, or the pandemic, brought things into a clearer light for other people. But the trends start earlier than people notice. And it's only when you go back and you're like, oh, look at these surveys from 30 years ago. Oh, we know where this came from. And that's why Gen Z, just now entering the workforce, is talking so much about flexibility. Like that's where the connection is.
Yeah, I would 100% agree that there was a need for it originally, right? And so the world had to react to that need and solve that issue, or it wasn't going to work well anymore. And I think, we want to make sure we're solving some of these workplace challenges so that the workplace can become more efficient. I think what you're saying is great. I thank you for reading the book in advance and preparing like that. It really is really super. It makes me feel good. So any perspective on what Colleen was just saying, Peter, as far as bringing a wisdom from a past experience to sort of inform and change the dynamic of the present?
Yeah, absolutely. Going back even a couple of conversations that we've had here, the workforce has changed. When I started out, you took a job, and that was a job for life. That's the job you had. You had a pension, and the husband went out and worked, and the wife stayed home and took care of the kids. And I'm sorry, but that was just wrong. And we knew that was wrong, and we figured it out. And as we're moving through, we're still evolving that. And I think we've always have. Even before I started in the workforce, things were different then too. So we keep changing things to meet our needs. And I think, we're getting better at it as we go along. And I think a lot of the things that we're doing now in business are still going to change. As you said, during the pandemic, we started moving to more working at home. Well, we had tried that before, but the technology wasn't there for us.
Yeah.
The technology almost wasn't there for us when COVID came in. But surprise, there's going to be a huge technology shift coming in the next few years. We won't be doing Zoom calls anymore. We'll be doing virtual reality calls.
Yeah.
Where we'll all be in a room with avatars. And you're going to see that age thing kind of disappear. I'm in virtual meetings now, probably twice a week at least. I have no idea how old these people are. I just see their avatars, and we're in the room together. And we're not wearing headsets and these weird things. It's, the technology is evolving beyond that. But as 5G comes out, and that's starting to roll out into the upper areas of the states here in Maine and New Hampshire, the technology is going to get better. The amount of data that we can move is going to be getting better. So you're going to see this big shift in technology. I think is going to take the generational thing and kind of blur those lines a little bit.
We'll have to wait and see. I think that's an interesting prognosis. Can't wait to see what happens.
And I totally know that we're at time here, but something that Peter just said is a little bit of Peter did not say something that triggered me, but something that maybe Peter was alluding to triggers me. And that's the idea of the lack of loyalty that millennials have to a business, because generations before millennials would stay at a company for their entire working lifespan. I mean, I talk about this all the time with my mother. She's been at the same company for almost 40 years. And for so long, I held on to this guilt of that. I changed when I was fresh out of college. I didn't even last a year at the first 4 jobs that I worked at. I was all like 7, 8, 9 months. I couldn't, and it's not that I couldn't hold a job. It's that my generation we were brought up to figure out what we wanted to do, and you experience what you want to do by getting out there and experiment and like experiencing it. So I just want to say, and again, like Peter did not say this, but it makes me hold on to this idea that people older than millennials believe that there's this lack of loyalty that we don't hold to a company. And I just want to say that no matter how long somebody lasts at a company, I fully believe that they're at that company and they're loyal to that company for the time that they're there. A job's not meant to be your entire world. You're meant to do the job and then move on. And I think there's this massive shift coming where people aren't staying at jobs for more than 5 years. I mean, I was at one company for 6 and I can't believe I lasted that long. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. Sorry to bring
Okay.
us right to time.
No, that's okay. I wanted to give Karam a second. You're going to have literally not even 30 seconds to give a final thought if you'd like, but I know Zena's looking for us to close up here, but thank you for that,
We'll share
Brittany,
the
too.
recording, so feel free to share your final thoughts.
Okay.
Acceptance and understanding and empathy.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think we could have talked a lot longer. Obviously, this
Yeah.
took a lot of tangents, and I really appreciate everyone jumping in today and
Thank you all.
exploring this issue.
Thank you, Anne, for leading this. And I just wanted to make sure that our audience knows we have a very fun event coming up next week on Thursday, November 2nd. The Sustainability Slam is an opportunity to continue this conversation and have more fun with stories about sustainability that are shared by members and non-members, and that's in LaBelle Winery in Derry. We also have upcoming webinars if you want to continue conversations as part of Pathways to Prosperity, Building Strong Communities for Business Success. We have a collaborative model for affordable housing that's happening in the Upper Valley. We're going to discuss the key players in that. And the next webinar for our Bear in Mind is Addressing Loneliness in the Workplace. And that's a pandemic that the new Surgeon General has raised alarms about. And we'll have a workshop over that. So this is going to be an interactive one. So I invite you to go visit more of our programming. And thank you again for our panelists. Thank you for this very engaging and enlightening conversation. Thank you all and have a great day and stay safe.
Yes.